personal interest. Servant leaders are not to allow accolades from the masses to dull their compassion for the specific needs of individuals. Here's Gene.
Jesus demonstrated this principle in a remarkable way when he was on the way up to Jerusalem. Great crowds were following. In fact, as they were nearing Jerusalem, they were singing psalms of praise. Matthew 21:9b, we hear what they were singing. Hosanna to the Son of David. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Hosanna in the highest heaven. And those crowds of people, we know in the context, had come from where he was across on the other side of Jordan. There were great crowds. And Jesus healed them. And they were following him. They believed that he was the Messiah. He was going to deliver them from Roman control, Roman power. And so they're paying great tribute to Jesus. But then something very interesting happened while they were on the way. In the midst of all of this praise and adoration and accolades to Jesus. And we read about it in verse 30. There were two blind men sitting by the road. Now, it's interesting that in Mark, it says there was one man. His name was Bartimaeus. And frequently what you have here is an account of the same event, just like when it says that James and John's mother came. And then another gospel says James and John came. Well, both are true. But each author is focusing in on a specific lesson. And here in Matthew, there were two blind men. But we know that Bartimaeus was basically the major spokesman, no doubt. There were two blind men sitting by the road. When they heard that Jesus was passing by, they cried out, "Lord, have mercy on us, Son of David." And notice the crowd demanded that they keep quiet. But they cried out all the more. By the way, I wonder if some of those people in that crowd who were saying, "Shut up, keep quiet, don't bother him," were people that Jesus actually had healed. It's a possibility, because people can be very selfish, very arrogant, and forget. But whoever they were, they demanded that they should be quiet. But they cried out even more, "Have mercy on us, Son of David." And Jesus stopped, called them, and said, "What do you want me to do for you?" "Lord," they said to him, "open our eyes." And moved with compassion. That's a very key phrase, a lesson that Jesus was teaching them to be good shepherds, people with compassion. Moved with compassion, Jesus touched their eyes. Immediately they could see, and they followed him. Now, what this says to me, in the midst of all these accolades, in the midst of all of these crowds, Jesus took time out of that very busy schedule when they were praising him and singing Hosanna to the King. Jesus took time to give attention to two blind men, two individuals. And to me, that's such a powerful lesson in relationship to ministry and how we should relate to people. It's not easy, but Jesus demonstrates to these men, his apostles particularly, don't forget why I came. I came to die for the sins of the whole world. And not just for the crowds, but for every individual who needs my attention. And he's illustrating that. Some of you have heard me share the experience I had with a professor at Moody Bible Institute when I was just a young man trying to find my way, and he took me on a trip one day, and he was really discipling me and mentoring me before I even knew what those words meant. And as we were driving or going along in the train, that tells you how long ago, we were coming from Chicago to Texas. He was going to minister in a little church somewhere in Texas. To this day, I don't know where that is, or I've forgotten where it is. But I was with him. We're on the train, and he just turned to me and he was reflecting. He says, Jane, there are two things I really pray for in my ministry, my life. He said, first of all, I pray that I'll never become just a professional. You know, there's a great lesson there for people who go into the ministry, and particularly who graduate from a seminary or Bible college with a degree, and all of a sudden we're professionals. Well, he was saying, I hope I'll never become just a professional. And then he said something else. He said, I always pray that I'll be thankful that someone comes to hear me and listen. I've never forgotten those words, because I was with him when he went into that little church and ministered to a handful of people, basically, relatively speaking. And you would think he was teaching 1,000. He was ministering to those people. And to me, there's just a great lesson there from Jesus in relationship to this principle. Let me just state the principle, and then we'll look at a question for application. Servant leaders are not to allow accolades from the masses to dull their compassion for the specific needs of individuals. It is so easy to lose that perspective, especially when you have the crowds that respond. But let's never forget that that crowd is made up of individuals. Here's the question: how did Paul, Silas, and Timothy model this principle on personal interests in their ministry in Thessalonica? And basically, he wrote these words when he was reflecting on their ministry. He said this in 1 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 7. Although we could have been a burden as Christ's apostles, instead we were gentle among you, that is all of you, plural pronoun, as a nursing mother nurtures her own children. Boy, what an illustration. Intimacy, personal interest, a nursing mother. Now, Paul was a man's man, but boy, he didn't hesitate to use that illustration. A nursing mother, the gentleness and love for those people. Later, he used the illustration of the father. He said this, as you know, like a father with his own children, we encouraged, comforted, and implored each one of you. And by the way, in the Greek text, that's redundant. It could be translated basically, we encouraged, comforted, and implored each one of you one by one to live worthy of God who calls you into his own kingdom and glory. I don't know how they did that, but he says one by one. I don't know whether Paul took a group and Timothy took a small group and Silas took another group, and I don't know how they did it, but they thought of individuals. To me, the illustration that comes out of that is at least twofold, and that is, number one, let's not be guilty of just rearing a family. Our families are made up of individuals, and every one of them has different needs. And Paul certainly illustrates what he believed about a father and how a father should function. That's a great challenge, isn't it? I found that, by the way, to be a real challenge as a pastor. Because the challenge for a pastor is, how do you practice this in the church and with your own family? And the problem is with pastors is that we can become so dedicated to individuals in the larger family that we forget the individuals in our own family. And that's a constant challenge that we have in ministry. I remember what Billy Graham said one time. What would he do differently? He said, I would spend more time with my family. I would have to echo the same thing. We can't go back and redo, but we can take seriously that thought at this moment in our life. And then there's certainly an illustration here for those of us who are pastors and spiritual leaders, and that is we should not just minister to a congregation. Now, as a congregation gets large, that's tough. And we have to develop ways and means of being able to practice this principle. And one of the ways in which we've done it is within small groups and multiplying our ministry through small groups, life groups, or at one time we called them mini churches, small churches, where we have many people who are leading and representing us. But one of the most exciting things that happened to me quite frequently is there would be a need, and somebody is hospitalized. And I've gone to the hospital when I found out about it, and there were about 15 or 20 people already sitting there ministering to those people from their own small group, and the leaders are there, which enabled me to simply reinforce what they were already doing. So we have to be creative in relationship to this principle. But if we don't believe this principle and take this principle seriously, it probably won't happen. It's a great lesson from Jesus. He never forgot the individual.